In this training, you will learn about the top 3 digital workflow that I think every architect and designers should know. And these workflows are designed to save you time and give you more creative freedom. And you also learn how to choose between Morpholio Trace and Procreate based on your project size, scale, type, and your drawing artistic goals. And plus, you will discover how to combine Morpholio Trace and Procreate into one seamless workflow that help you create, iterate, and even present faster. You also learn how AI can fit into your drawing process, without replacing your hand drawing style or design intent. And we're not using AI to design yet. I think it's important to ask the question, how could I use AI to explore ideas faster? How could I help clients understand my conceptual vision better? And how could I use this tool to maybe win more work? Just a quick note, if you are interested to follow along, I have many of the case studies that we will be looking at today, and you can download them using the link below. So the Morpholio Trace app is what I think probably 80-90% of the architects, interior designers, and landscape designers should consider when they're starting a workflow on the iPad, because this app is designed by architects for the AEC industry. But the examples I'm going to show you today are scale, redline, and then there's a special cool features that's only available inside Morpholio Trace. The Morpholio Trace app is super competent because it has a scale ruler, and this is what they call like a super scale ruler. So this ruler will expand, it will contract based on your pinch of the finger, and it is calibrated to the drawing itself. So it actually feels like you're drawing 1-to-1 in the AutoCAD model space, or if you're using Revit or ArchiCAD, it is that idea. As you zoom in, the scale itself, you can see the scale itself, it's going to change, and you zoom out, it's going to change as well. It can get pretty close to even like a 1/4 inch or inch when you're doing interior cabinetry work. But here, what we're looking at is a site plan. So this site plan has multiple views. So this is a bigger, more zoomed out view of this floor plan with a little bit of context around it. You could be a landscape designer collaborating with an architect, and one of you is responsible for doing areas outside the house. And the architect could be focused on the inside of the project, on the floor plan, for example. So let's say if you are the architect focused on the floor plan, you can simply tap on one of these other layers that I currently have, and you can turn off these extra information that you don't need. So this could be one of the views that if you're an interior architect, you could be using this view to be actually drawing the inside of the house. And when you're ready to move out to the outside of the house, you can create a larger layer. And this layer can show more information about how the sun is moving, some of the environmental factors, and you can also just do some of the landscape things yourself. I think what's interesting about this drawing is the workflow actually started not just from anywhere. This is based on a set of as-built drawings. It's an existing house. We got survey from an as-built vendor, and I've actually used the 1/4 inch floor plan in here as a basis to build off part of the floor plan that is going to be renovated. You can see I also brought in this survey. So I've overlaid the survey on top of the floor plan so I can get some contour lines in there, and there's also other miscellaneous information like where the trees are, the property map. So these are the information that are going to be really helpful when you overlay them on top of each other. Let's see what I've got on top of this. But imagine you can also overlay your sun diagram and other things into one drawing, and I'll quickly show you another example of this same project, just more zoomed out with those kind of information. The project is really built in layers, with layers for the shadow, the floor plan, and this is getting a little distracting, so I'm actually going to turn this off. And then you can see there are layers for the coloring, which I brought in as a landscape file. If you're a landscape designer, you could be doing the outside of the building, and then we can just bring in your landscape background into the architecture background, as long as you're starting from the same file that you can share with each other from the beginning. And on top of there, you can see I've added in some of the environmental factors into the drawing. So with a simple file, you can actually have multiple drawings living in this one file, which is kind of cool, right? So another example of this project is this particular drawing utilized the built-in Apple Map feature, which I'll show you here. It's using the native Apple Map feature, which you can bring in. And the moment you bring it in, it's actually scaled. So you can see, if I pull up the ruler, you can see this base satellite view is actually brought into scale. And then I did a very similar approach where I've added in my survey to overlay on top of this satellite image. And the satellite image is helpful to get a sense of where the foliage, the trees, the landscape, and the houses around it, so that in case you want to build these contexts into the drawing, you can if the survey doesn't show it. So that's really useful, and it is what I use. In here, you can also see this is a drawing of the roof plan from the same as-built vendor. And then I might just cycle through some of these a little quicker. You can see in this particular drawing, I've also brought in this sun diagram, which might be a little hard for you to see on screen. But this sun diagram is showing the movement of the sun from east to west for this particular site location. The drawings are a little bit more opaque at the moment, but the drawings, like the previous version, is built in layers. So I'm not finalizing all the drawings all at once. It's actually done very slowly and methodically. The layer process is also not linear. So I'm doing some of the line work first and I'm doing some of the coloring that comes afterwards. But at the end, what you get is a drawing that I think is very compelling to use as a site diagram. And I think this kind of drawing is what architects are very familiar with. So this Morpholio Trace is just incredible for this kind of scale and type. Now, I'm gonna just quickly go through a interior project now, because if you are an interior designer or if you're an interior architect, this workflow is just also really, really good. As you know, Morpholio Trace can open up PDF and you can import PDF set. This particular drawing, you can see, has a hand drawing quality to it, and it's because it is hand drawn for the most part. This drawing is a ArcD size, so that's 24 by 36 inch elevation. So this elevation is at ½ inch. And this is what I started with after I blocked out some of the interior elevation based off on this floor plan. And then from there, because I blocked out the ceiling height, basically the width of the cabinetry, I started to doodle and do some of the design thinking work. This is where you can ideate, you can sketch very quickly. So this is just one of the many layers that is in this place. And beyond that, you can turn up the opacity. And this is the layer that I show the client. So it's a little bit drawn more carefully, but you can see it's got this sketchy quality to it. And this is done for both the floor plan and the elevation. And to me, this is really no different than sketching on an actual 24 by 36 inch paper with trace on it. You might not be able to see the entire sheet when you're all zoomed out like this. And it does take a little bit of being familiar with drawing, with zooming in and zooming out, but you can get pretty close up. I think this zoomed in is very comfortable as you're drawing on real paper. And you can either export this entire sheet out as a set, or you can just export each one of these individual views as a drawing for the presentation. And later on, when I show you Procreate, I'm actually going to show you how to bring this into Procreate and adding some of the beautiful coloring with my Copic marker, or if you're a watercolor person, you can also use watercolor for that. But I want to show you this workflow is very compelling for interior designer. And there's another page in this PDF, and this page is mostly for a master bathroom area. And you can see the different elevations and the cabinetry for the master bath and for like a laundry room. Now, the last example is going to be more of a landscape workflow, and this is for the landscape designers. This is from a student project. At the time, the student was primarily using AutoCAD to do most of her design work. So this is actually a PDF version of her AutoCAD. What I thought I would do is to teach her to do the same thing with a drawing-like quality over this. So if you are a landscape designer, you could be doing your initial layout in sort of a red line construction. So this could be a base layer, and then you can have another layer on top to do your layout, space planning for each of these plan types. And a really useful feature in here for landscape designers is you can tell exactly how big you want your projector to be, so that you can actually space plan these different sizes of species very well, as I've demonstrated here. At this point, we're still very loose with drawing, so I'm not being very careful with how many layers I'm gonna have. It's what comes after it going to be more important. So after you have a set of drawings like this, where you're comfortable about inking over this or just drawing over this with better drawings, you can see these are the drawings as I turn them on. So I'm gonna have the same drawing for the pavers. I'm gonna have a layer for the plants. I'm gonna have a layer for the tree. And this is all very non-destructive. And when I say non-destructive, it really just means you have a lot of flexibility to go back, update your drawings if they lived on a layer of itself. So imagine if you're just updating, if you're just removing a tree, if that tree was on a layer by itself, you don't really have to erase the things underneath it. So this just makes a good practice of trying to be intentional with how many layers you're gonna have when you're drawing, what the color layers look like. And then from this point, I'm gonna turn off my construction line layer because I'm going to turn on all the coloring layers, which are also laid out very methodically. So I've got a layer for the ground, the bricks, the coloring plants, the tree, special grease pencil technique. And then once you add the shadow, it's looking pretty good. And then there's just a separate layer for the white line work to bring out some of the shadow in the drawing. And then you can do this approach too with either Procreate and Morpholio Trace. This is a special paper texture. Once you're adding this paper texture, it really brings in that paper quality to your presentation. And this is a very quick technique and tactic you can bring in to really soften that digital look a little bit more. As soon you're kind of finished with a drawing, you're thinking about building a legend. You can start to building your description and a legend for the plant. And finally, you can also add on a custom title block that maybe you've used in the past. So this could be, like a CAD title block that you can simply import into this and writing your company information, client's address, and really have this all be done within Morpholio Trace without actually resorting to a computer for this kind of drawing work. And this is not limited to just this paper size. We could use the same thing if we're actually using Morpholio Trace as a redline tool. So in this set of drawings, what you can see is not only have I done a lot of red lines while I'm walking through the site, but in each of the red lines that you do, you can bring in the same title block. So you can actually export, let's say in this case, what I'm doing right here is testing a different kind of a proportion of the elevation. And I didn't want to bring it into AutoCAD, so I just sketched it right over the existing PDF. And then I put it on a 8.5 by 11 title block. And this you can simply share with a client, someone in the office, if they do want to draft this out, or if it's something like a casework or cabinetry in the middle of a site visit. Let's say in this case, the client made a last minute decision about changing up the appliances. So what I did here was I quickly drafted out the new version, the layout of the kitchen cabinetry. And I sent this as an ASK with this title block to the cabinet maker without going to the office and draft it out as a architectural detail. So this way you can actually save a lot of time because someone looking at this information, they really just need to know the new layout and how precise this is going to be enough for them to revise their shop drawing, as was the case here. And because we have this super scale ruler, right, we can really expand to see the level of details down to the inch or even a quarter inch. So you don't even need to be an architect to use this. You could be a cabinet maker, and this can be a great tool for replacing the scale and your paper and pencil workflow. So far, we've seen some interior elevations. We've seen what an architect might do for a site analysis. Actually, I want to do this one case study very quickly because this is very unique to Morpholio Trace. So in this drawing, what you're seeing is an interior perspective, right? And in the same drawing, there's also a more sketchier version of this perspective or this house. And in this last kind of a slide, this is more of a polished rendering, if you will. So this is something that I would be comfortable submitting for like a site permit or planning. So this is going to be very helpful when you're providing these rendering type like renderings. But what's unique about this workflow is that it's actually not just in 2D, but this is a 3D model that I brought in from SketchUp. You can bring your SketchUp model, set the views to the 3 views that I showed you, and you can begin sketching on top of this with the built-in perspectives. So for example, if I were just to very quickly set a view like this, there are controls for the sun angle. You can move it, or you can actually set it to your actual location, time of the day, and set your north. So as soon as I click on this check mark in here, I'm going to be able to draw in perspective because the perspective is built in for you. You can see by these 2 pluses. So the moment I'm drawing inside, you can see you're drawing perspective with this perspective tool. And this is incredibly fun and also relaxing when I am doing any sort of perspective drawing from scratch. Having this feature, having this building feature just makes it so much easier. And honestly, I'm not a fan of building perspective from scratch. So even with the other app Procreate, there's something similar where you can set the perspective, but you can't orbit the model around and find a view, or maybe you're working in front of a client and there is a view that maybe it's not in the presentation, but you do want to just quickly sketch over the model to show the client something. This is just fabulous for that. Now we're in Procreate. Procreate is the app that I started with in 2017. And my primary goal at the time was to really find something that can replace my trace layer, my scale ruler, and really gives me that real traditional imitation of the tools that I was using at the time. And it has achieved all these things. As soon as I moved on to larger projects that required more of the super scale ruler, which is the case for most people. I think most people should start in Morpholio Trace and then move to Procreate for things like coloring. So the same kitchen elevation, what I'll show you using this as example. These are the coloring that are produced in Procreate because the brushes are better in here, to be honest. The Copic markers are better, the pencil are better, and there's a special watercolor brush that I use that's also really good. You're not going to get that kind of feeling with Morpholio Trace. So if I just open up this layers palette a little bit, you can see that this workflow really began with the Morpholio Trace background. So this was just simply brought from Morpholio Trace as a JPEG file. So you can bring this as a JPEG file like I've done here, and then you can start coloring. You can see the coloring that I've done here are very carefully grouped, and that's because each of these layers that are assigned a color, like the cabinet, the wood, the tile, the countertop, they can be changed independently without affecting the colors on any other layer. And this is also another huge advantage that Morpholio Trace currently doesn't have, is the ability to tweak the color or the hue or the exposure or the things that you would normally would think Photoshop can do very easily. So for example, here I'm highlighting the cabinet layer. So if I wanted to change the layer of the cabinet, if the client comes back, it's like, this is not the right kind of green that I'm looking for, I can easily, because I have this layer on a layer by itself, I can easily tweak the hue, the saturation, now that you want a purple cabinet, and the brightness using these sliders. And these sliders are not just for the hue, you can also find the similar sliders for the curves, the color balance, which are tools that we're very familiar with from Photoshop. So this is probably a really big reason why I would recommend someone to also look into Procreate, is having this ability to change color at any time. So when you are coloring at first, you don't have to be so careful or worried that, oh, I picked the wrong color, but this will fix that for you. And the brushes that I'm using in this panel, these are all free. These are all free, offered to you on my website. So I made this resource complete for free because these are the ones that I feel like I really needed, from the traditional felt pen to the marker that demonstrated in here to a watercolor quality that I'm going to show you in a different project. And you can see this project has a little bit more complexity to it besides the coloring. So if I zoom out a little bit more, you can see I have a different variation of this bookcase. So if I zoom in here, and this is a different option for ending the counter. So here I have an option for having a taller cabinet to bookend this cabinet. And if you move over to this center island, this is not an option, but this is just another view, having the center island in front of it when you are assessing this kitchen elevation. So very easy to do, but it just takes a little bit of practice, and it's something that I think everyone can really benefit from. So the two other examples of Procreate I want to show you today, one of them is this one. So this kind of rendering really surprised me and my previous office because we weren't sure the planning department or the neighborhood or the client would like this kind of hand rendering. And, to my surprise, I think now it makes more sense because 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have 3D renderings or SketchUp or Photoshop. People actually submitted hand drawings. So when we started to switch out the SketchUp views with Photoshop work that took us hours, tens of hours to do, I started to swap them out with more of a hand drawing quality. And I submitted styles where it was very provocative. It showcased the massing of the architecture. It showcased the material, the fenestration, the landscape. When we started to do this kind of rendering, we got far fewer comments or feedback from the planning department, and we could get through our projects in terms of the design much quicker because the feedback were very different kind of feedback as opposed to submitting something that was more photorealistic, if you will. And the feedback for those kind of views were a little bit more nitpicky. So I'll show you the quick layout of this so you get a sense of how this is laid out from the very beginning. So if I turn everything off, starting with a Rhino model, so this came from Rhino. It was very simple. It just had line weights on it, and the lines were enough for me to build the perspective to start the drawing. I don't need the walls to be modeled in layers. These are the things that will be much faster for me to do over 2D. And if I open up this pen folder, what you'll see is a very similar approach with drawing in layers. So one layer could be more of the skeleton or the bones for the composition. Another layer could be the vegetation, the trees and the grass. So I want to just to differentiate these two. And then another layer could be the texture. And the last layer I have here is detail. And this is not very prescriptive. As you can see, you can have 4, you can have 10. It's really how comfortable you are with drawing. So if you have 10, then I would say you might have a harder time finding where you've drawn something. So 4 to 5 is generally a good practice that I think in general. But the coloring layers are a little bit more. So with coloring, again, it is important to make sure they are in their own group or layers. So there is a layer for sky, there's a layer for the trees, and then the building elevation, they're kind of grouped from glazing, material, and facade. And then there's a texture for the ground. So I won't go into this. This is actually pretty self-explanatory in my opinion. And then there is one little tip that I think I showed you earlier in the Morpholio Trace example, and this is an overlay of a watercolor paper texture. So what this does is if I didn't have it on the overlay blending mode, this is what the watercolor paper texture looks like without putting it on blending mode. But by putting it on a overlay blending mode, what this is going to do is it's going to infuse the texture of that paper into the part where there's color or pixel. So this one little thing can make everything come together. Hopefully you can see the difference between the before and after. And if I give you a quick glimpse behind the scene, I'm going to show you that quick time lapse. You can see like drawing on paper too, you're starting with these broader strokes and texture before you're adding the details. And at some point, you get to a point where when you're done with coloring and when you're getting feedback from your client or your colleagues, sometimes they'll tell you, oh, there is a tree in the front that maybe you're missing, as the case here. So I've gone back to the drawing, I've added in this tree, I've erased part of the drawings behind it, and I've recolored the drawing and then retextured everything. And this level of editing and updating just isn't possible with traditional drawing. If you made a mistake on real watercolor, there's just no way of going back to correcting it, especially if it's something major as changing the design or something like that. So digital drawing definitely has that advantage. And I'll show you another drawing. And this drawing is based off of interior photos. And this is what I use quite often because, when you're visiting a client's house for the first time, sometimes photos are your best friend. Before we start to use our LiDAR on the camera to build a model, but photos, generally, everyone would take some photos. If you can just learn how to take a little bit better photos where it's a little bit wider, the vertical lines are straight, you can easily bring in your ideas to your client through drawing. So if I go ahead and just turn off this photo by itself, you can see this is a line version of this work without the coloring, and the coloring built in a very similar way. I won't show you everything here because you know the logic and the workflow now. It's one folder with everything contained in here. All the materials and the textures are on their own layer as much as possible. So if I need to change the hue of the cabinet, very easily done. Couple seconds of work. And the same thing with the texture paper right on top. So now we've looked at Morpholio Trace, we've looked at Procreate. Hopefully you get a good sense of what each is capable of. And the third part of this workshop I want to show you is AI. This is the Midjourney interface, and this is the web version of Midjourney. You might have heard Midjourney is also available on Discord. This is not what I am recommending to you because the Discord version just have so many technical hurdles. So the web version is not free. It's $8 a month. What I'm gonna do here is actually this interface will allow you to upload a sketch. So I'm gonna use this sketch that you've seen earlier, and I'm going to ask Midjourney to take this black and white version of the sketch and generate a pencil or a color version of this in the traditional drawing style. I'm not asking it to spit me out a photorealistic rendering. I want to be able to use this to generate something that I can show the clients without doing the coloring myself. What I would do here is this is the prompt control, and Midjourney is really sensitive to how you prompt it, and it's not as hard as you think as long as you are using the right format, the order of things. So I'm going to show you how I prompted for this particular image, and I actually don't know what this is going to look like because every time you rerun, it doesn't give you a same image every time. So what I'll do here maybe is in this first attempt, I'll just type in architectural drawing because this is important. You're telling it what format do you want this image to come out. Do you want it to be a drawing? Do you want it to be a photo? So I want it to be a drawing of a mid-century home, let's say with open floor plan, brick columns, large window looking distant California Bay. Let's say, give me a color pencil in Al Forster style. Al Forster is a famous watercolorist illustrator who is not here today, but I love to look at his drawings for inspiration. And lastly, I'm gonna say on white paper. Okay, so these are going to be my prompt. And here, this controls the stylization. So how much you want the image to be stylized. So right now I'm gonna pull it all down to 0 and I'll show you one of the controls that's most impactful. So I'm going to click on the retexture tab of this before I hit the generate button. So I'm going to hit generate, and this is going to spit out 4 variations of the drawing. And let's all take a look at it together. And it's fairly quick how this will spit out an image. Okay, so this is what it gave me, right? You're probably thinking, Henry, this is not close to what I am looking for. It looks a little bit more like a kid's drawing than something that I can actually use. Or you might think, Henry, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I can see the color version of this. I can totally give this to a client and they'll be amazed by what I came up with. So the controls that I want to play around here is this stylization. And this stylization is really a specific thing to Midjourney. So stylization influences how strongly the Midjourney aesthetic is applied. Low stylization value produces an image that closely match to the drawing itself, like the drawing I have right now, but it's less artistic, right? So the high stylization means it's more artistic, the way that you want to give Midjourney and have it do its thing. So I'm going to increase the stylization from 0 to 300. I'm just going to type it in here. I'm going to see what a 300 value will give me. So I'm gonna click on enter here. Usually this takes about 30 seconds to a minute. Okay. Oh, look at that. That looks way better than what I could have hoped for. So you can see this is really Midjourney taking it to the next level where it's trying to make it a little bit more artistic. Okay, so this is stylization at 300. We can go all the way up to like 1,000. Let's rerun this at 1,000. So 1,000 may be actually a little bit too much for most people. So this is at 1,000. It's definitely more artistic, right? And not realistic, but artistic than the 300 compared to nothing. Let's say you kind of like the 3 to 1,000. Maybe it's not quite 1,000, maybe it's just 500. Okay, but we're going to just revise this prompt a little bit because I think I can add in a little bit more detail to this prompt. And just generally speaking, the more specific you can ask Midjourney, the more it is going to be reflected in the output. So I'll add brick columns. And let's say we want wooden beams. We want wood floor and give me wood ceiling and the wood beam in the view. Did I say wood ceiling here? Okay, let's go ahead and ask it to reprompt. So here we're gonna get another set of image that should reflect the prompt improvement. We're at 62%, 93%. Okay, you can see how this new set of images, they do have wood ceiling, they do have wood beam, they do have the wood floor. So now this is looking really, really good. So I wanted just to show you what this is capable of. There's so much to this. You can select, for example, you can select part of the drawing and then you can tell it to add something in place of this. Say if you want to add skylights, that would be something that I would want to experiment with. But as you can see, this is already a really good place. If you had a black and white image to start, you can ideate within 10 minutes that you can spit out 20 or 30 of these as a way to help you think through things. These are not things that you may want to show to your client. So I want to show you another application of this. Let's say you're a landscape designer. You want to kind of generate a bunch of stencils or for your floor plan. I might ask here in the create option, so you can see I've experimented with this a little bit. Here, I might actually ask in the prompt, let's say drawing of 50 native California plants and shrubs. Want a top-down plan view with shadow in watercolor style for landscape design on white background so that maybe you can cut this out and put it into Morpholio or Procreate. And then in here, what I would do is bring in a existing drawing, which you have. Actually, let me just, this is the drawing I'm going to upload in here. I'm going to upload this drawing as an image prompt. So you can use this image as sort of its own reference to prompt it. So I'm going to upload it as an image prompt. And then let's see, I'm going to stylize it maybe at 200. And let's see what it comes out with. So the more stylization that you put into it, it could look a little weird or it could look too real. It may not be what you're looking for. So it is important to play with that stylization. So in here, what I'm gonna get are these images. So I think it's a good starting point. You might like some of them. Actually, this one is not too bad. And oh, actually this one's pretty good. And there's a lot of controls on the right side where you can play with. Let's say you want to rerun this, you can rerun the same prompt with a little bit more parameters that are built in here. So to generate like people, plants, I'm not sure about FF&E. This is the kind of prompts that can give you a whole library of things that if you want to build from scratch, these are the things that I think can save you just so much time if this is part of your workflow. And there you have it, from site photo to sketch to final rendering with AI now as your creative co-pilot. If you'd like to dig deeper into what you saw today, I pulled together a full set of case study files that you can download directly from my website. And before you go, I would just love to hear from you in the comments. What part of this workflow do you think will make the biggest impact in your own practice and why?